Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the Starfish and Church podcast. Today, we are really excited to have with us our guest, Doug Kirkpatrick. Doug is an organizational change consultant. He's a TEDx and a keynote speaker, executive coach, author, educator. He's been a regular contributor to the Huffington Post blog on great work cultures, and I've just loved your book, Doug. Beyond Empowerment, The Age of the Self-Managed Organization. And I've told a lot of people about this book, and it's a small book, but man, it is packed. And I figured that it's a small book because you're probably like, well, that's all I needed to say about that. So, but I know that you could say a lot more. But for those of you that are not familiar with Doug and his work, and really the company's been a part of for years, Morningstar. I always tell everybody. I always say, if you've eaten a tomato in the last month, you've probably had, or if you've had spaghetti or a pizza, you probably had the Morningstar product. Is that a fair assumption, Doug?
Absolutely a fair assumption. Morningstar is the largest tomato processor in the world, and I believe everyone in North America has eaten our product by this time. So it goes into everything in the grocery store that you can think of. You mentioned pizza and spaghetti, but barbecue sauce, taco sauce, steak sauce, fish sauce, tomato soup, Bloody Mary mix. The products are endless, and also millions more around the world have eaten it because Morningstar exports globally.
Yeah, well, it's and the amazing story for me is just the way you guys manage, and it's in the subtitle of this book, The Age of the Self-Managed Organization. That's the subtitle of your book, Beyond Empowerment. Now, if I would like for us to just jump into this conversation right off the bat.
Well, let me ask this question. If someone were an outsider looking in at Morningstar, kind of tell us the story of what would look different. Like I have some experience with tomato processing. When I was 17, I threw tomatoes at some people and got arrested. Okay. So that's about all I know about tomato processing at this point. Okay. So, assume our listeners, are kind of clueless. Like, what would look different is it a factory plant? I mean, what does it look like and how does it operate? Self-management.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a kind of physical description first. So Morningstar developed a state-of-the-art tomato processing facility in 1990. It was and is huge. In 1990 dollars, it cost $28 million. That would be double that today. Imagine large buildings, like 40,000, 50,000 square foot buildings, surrounded by tall structures made of stainless steel. So there are tons of evaporators and boilers and pumps and turbines and valves and gears and machines. It's when it's running, which is 3.5 months a year, July through mid-October. If you go to the factory, it's about 100 decibels. Extremely fast throughput, unloading trucks full of tomatoes, about 27 tons per truck, unloading maybe up to 30, 35 of those trucks per hour. They feed into a process. The process maybe takes 4 hours from start to finish. When you threw tomatoes and got arrested, you may not have realized at the time, but a tomato is 95% water, and it's only 5% solids and sugar. So the trick of tomato processing is to evaporate the water out of the tomato so that it goes from 5% solids or so to about 30% solids, or a concentration of 6 times. And it's just kind of a constant evaporation process for about 4 hours. And then at the very end of the process, they sterilize the product and feed it into a filling machine. It fills boxes that weigh 3,000 pounds each. And those are stored in a warehouse for eventual shipment to a customer somewhere. Heinz ketchup, somebody that's going to make that tomato concentrate into something like ketchup or barbecue sauce. That's kind of the process. It's highly automated. There are lots of people that sort of run the factory, but some of the roles are very, self-managed, one person, two people kind of running the factory from the standpoint of watching all the pressures and temperatures and the equipment and throughput and so forth. So it's a very high volume, fast volume throughput process. Makes a lot of product. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3.5 months, and it shuts down, and then it's as quiet as a graveyard for about 8.5 months till we start again. That's kind of the physical overview. Now, the cultural and organizational overview is if you walk into the control room any time of the day or night and ask the operator, who is probably a highly skilled mechanic, electromechanic, technician of some kind, and ask them, who is your boss? That person will say, the factory is my boss.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference is between Morningstar and traditional organizations, there are no human bosses, literally. So we have.
And that just sounds like crazy talk, right? To most people.
Yeah, more so a few years ago, but yes, absolutely. It's hard for people. Gee, how can that be? I've always been around a boss, and business schools train managers to scale the steps of the hierarchical ladder and advance and get promoted. So that's what most B school experience is all about. That's what most organizations are all about. So we have titles, we have positions and roles and power and authority and all this stuff. But we abandoned that completely, and we found it works really well.
Wow. So, and that brings up when you talk about empowerment, and in particular beyond empowerment, the word empowerment's used a ton in. I mean, you can't hardly pick up it's hard to pick up a leadership book today without, hey, we're here to empower people. But you push back against that verbiage, that language. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So we basically founded the company and the governance of the company on two core principles, and we think these are the most fundamental principles of human interaction, and they are people should not use force against other people, and people should keep the commitments they make to each other. These principles are the foundation of all law everywhere in the world. So every law against assault and battery and theft and burglary and kidnapping and murder and all the rest is predicated on the idea that people should not use force or coercion against other human beings. And similarly, the principle of keeping commitments, that's foundational to law, especially civil law. If you think about contract law, it would be meaningless if parties didn't do what they said they were going to do. So we said we're going to embrace these core principles and adopt them as the governance, pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise. And so there are some important corollaries to these principles. And if you get to the empowerment question, the problem with traditional empowerment is that it involves one person with power lending his or her power to another individual, a subordinate who has less power. And there's a fatal flaw with that scenario, because what you loan can always be repossessed. So if I've loaned you my power and I decide I want it back, I'll just take it because I have power. So what we said in adopting these two core principles is that no one has unilateral power over other individuals. So the power isn't something you can lend only to take back at a later date. Everyone has all the power they need from the moment they start work And that power includes the power to communicate, to engage in teamwork, to acquire resources needed to fulfill your role, to build relationships with other people, and to do your best job. And everybody has that power. Everybody has a voice. So there's no sense of one person lending power. That's not what happens. So we say self-management is beyond empowerment. We say that self-management is power itself.
What makes self-management work? What are the aspects and the structures and, kind of the key principles and practices that lend to creating a culture of self-management?
Well, I mentioned, the two core principles, and we adopted those basically in a construction trailer while we were building our first factory, and became self-managed at that moment in time. And so those principles became really the governance, pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise. And they became embedded in everyday communication. And culture has a lot to do with communication styles and leadership. Everything we did, we were always cognizant of those two core principles, to the degree that if an individual violated one or both of those principles, it was immediately called out and spotted and dealt with. So culture has a lot to do with language. So we talk at Morningstar about colleagues. We don't call people employees. If you look at the literal dictionary definition of the word employee, it means someone who works for another person for pay, which would be, if you have any exposure to millennials at all, that would be the most uninspiring kind of role you can imagine for most people, and especially millennials and younger. We call people colleagues because colleague connotes professionalism. We consider everyone to be a professional, whether your job is turning the lights on in the morning or cleaning toilets or negotiating for bank loans. It doesn't matter. Everyone is considered a full charge professional and treated as such and respected as such. We kind of obliterated this anachronistic dichotomy between blue collar and white collar. That doesn't exist at Morningstar. Everyone is a professional colleague, and with all that connotes. So we pay a lot of attention to language in the workplace to bolster the culture and maintain it. Don't talk a lot about HR. As Henry Mintzberg famously said, I'm not a human resource, I'm a human being. So we don't talk about HR. There's no HR department per se. We kind of eschew terms like head count as if people don't have bodies, or FTEs as if people are acronyms. So we try to instantiate the language of humanity and bring humanity back into the workplace and respect for each and every individual voice.
I have a question, Doug. I can't help, as a church leader, I can't help but think of some of our really important theological underpinnings. So one of the things that we believe it's called the Priesthood of Believers. In other words, everyone who's a part of this Jesus movement called the church are equal. Like everybody's a priest. It used to be under the old system, it was a caste system. You had the priests and then you had the people. And Jesus removed all those barriers, in essence, is what he's saying, so that there's total equity. And everybody's got that stature of dignity now. Mm-hmm. So the problem is people in churches, and I think there's something, I love the positive belief you have about humanity, but there's also this dark side where it's like, no, we want a king. We actually want a boss. Mm-hmm. Like and so pastors step into this kind of social contract that's literally thousands of years old in the human psyche, and they're expected to be the expert. They're expected to be above the rest. So how have you guys deconstructed that in your context, and how would you recommend a church leader consider deconstructing it in their context?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's some really important corollaries that flow from the two core principles that I mentioned earlier. And the first thing I'd like to point out is part of the reason they're so inspiring is that if you imagine a world where everyone aligned their behavior with these core principles, you wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on your doors. So we know that's not reality, but that's not the point. The point is the closer we approach that kind of ideal future state in our organizations, the better off we are as people. The more opportunity we have for happiness and harmony and prosperity and all the rest. Imagine a world where everyone did what they said they were going to do. It would be an amazing world, would it not? But we know that's not reality, but that's not the point. If we get closer to that ideal, we're better off. And we're better off economically because keeping commitments, doing what you say you're going to do, has economic value. It's the very definition of integrity. So we're just saying we want to get closer to that ideal state, knowing we'll probably never get there. So we sort of set up this sort of idealistic construct and sort of, kind of try to pull people into the future culturally with that. And then if you look at organizations, how, people want a king, they want a boss, I guess some people do. But then they should probably choose to work for an organization or attend a church where they have a boss, because they don't want to work for Morningstar. Because the mission is the boss. And the thing about working in an organization or associated with an organization with no boss is there's no place to hide. If something needs to be done and you're there and you see that it needs to be done, then it's your job to do it.
So the accountability level is not lower; it's actually higher.
Higher. It's actually higher. Yeah, and I also point out, who's more likely to spot a threat or opportunity in the workplace? A boss who wanders through a few times a day, or people who are working side by side with each other all day long and have full authority to speak up and address issues in real time. So if you apply that logic to a church, then and you want a boss or a king or a pastor that's going to tell people what to do, then you should seek that kind of place out, because you don't want to be in a self-managed organization.
So for a leader that has only known one way of leading, is as a manager, as a boss, how does that role shift? And you talk about coaching and mentoring. How does a leader start thinking in his or her head, here's how my role has to shift, my day-to-day role as far as my purpose here in this organization?
Right. So very interesting thing about leadership is that when you abandon command authority, meaning no one has any authority to tell other people what to do or to direct the activities of other people, that means that everything is accomplished through request and response, through influence, persuasion, communication, collaboration, request and response. We believe that creates stronger leaders, because if I can just tell you what to do with the expectation that you will obey my directives, that's not leadership. It's not real leadership. That's just me telling you what to do. If I have to influence you to engage in some activity by building a relationship with you and having mutual trust and respect and communication, we think that's leadership. That's true leadership. Command authority causes leadership muscles to atrophy. Excuse me. Earning the mantle of leadership through communication, trust, and respect causes leadership muscles to get stronger.
I'm curious, Doug, give us a snapshot of, let's say, typically businesses, organizations have an annual cycle, and they start looking to the future, And sometimes they'll do like a SWOT analysis or some other tool to get a read on, here's reality, here's where we're going next. In most organizations, there's 2 or 3, 4 people who sit in a room and then they make those decisions and roll it out. So what does it look like in the self-managed organization? Like, what is that process of kind of setting the course for the next year, the next season? How does everybody speak into it?
Yeah, so very much involving every single contributor. It's not just a tiny cohort that makes all the decisions on strategy and then gets buy-in for the rest of the organization. If you think about the definition of management, the traditional historical definition of management is, planning, organizing, controlling, selecting, and coordinating. And so planning is strategy, organizing is leadership, selecting is hiring and firing, coordinating is teamwork, controlling is budgeting, time and resources and money, etc. So in self-management, everyone is involved in all those functions of management at some level. To the degree they're interested and have the capacity. Everyone is involved in those things, and that's why self-managers often are paid more than traditional managers in traditional organizations, because if you look at Morningstar, the average mechanic might be personally in charge of $7 to $10 million worth of equipment. Mm-hmm. And they're responsible for strategy and budgeting and capital projects and hiring and firing and management and all those things. And so that there's a premium of value associated with that. And Morningstar, of course, does have an annual cycle because it's kind of an annual business, but it's not a slave to the annual cycle. So it's very much, event-based budgeting. If somebody comes up with some great idea right in the middle of the tomato season and needs to implement a capital project on the fly that could save millions of dollars, great. Let's go. Let's do it. If it makes sense and the stakeholders are good with it, then let's go. So we're not going to wait until the end of the year to figure out how we're going to save money, 9 months down the road. We're just going to take advantage of those opportunities in the moment. And everyone has the ability to lead, and everyone has the ability to innovate. So the beauty of self-management is that leadership and innovation can spring forward from any point at any time. And there are great examples. A mechanic theorized a better way to handle chemicals, came up with a sketch, an engineering sketch, sold it to the stakeholders, found some financing, implemented a project, saved millions of dollars in a very short period of time. So these kinds of opportunities are available to every single person. And if you think about an industry, then how do you compete against that? If you're limiting strategy and innovation to a very tiny cohort of individuals, designated strategists, innovators, you're missing out on huge opportunities. So there's a kind of opportunity cost associated with that.
Wow. So you're really you're really leveraging a multiplicity of gifts out of individuals, because typically we say, okay, here's your job, do this. You're not being paid to think. We want you to pull these levers at the right time, push these right buttons and everything. But now you're getting the whole person. You're getting their brain. They're getting the other giftings that you may not even, I'm sure there's a lot of surprises, beautiful surprises that have come out of Morningstar workers, I would suspect.
All the time.
You had no idea this package, you were getting this package when you hired this person.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I was recently coaching a millennial back in the Midwest, and they were in a role in a company where they were probably, the company was probably engaging 30% of their brain power. They were just like spending time, twiddling their thumbs like, well, I could be doing lots of things and they won't let me. This is crazy. So after some coaching, they left that company, got into another company where they're like fully engaged, not to the point of being burned out or overworked, but fully engaged. and totally respected. And this person said, I only want two things. I want to be engaged and I want to be respected. That's all I need.
Wow.
Good.
Wow. Can you give an example, Doug, of maybe a company you've consulted with and worked with that said, oh man, read your book, or, I've looked at, some of the Morningstar Self-Management Institute ideology and everything, and we want you to help us get there. But then when you started really unpacking it, they were like, no, with that, I don't think we want to. What's that look like in your experience in working with organizations that wanted to transition or thought they wanted to?
Yeah, it can happen. I would say the kind of common denominator there is that some person, some leader, or some subset of leaders thinks that this would be a cool idea because they've read about it somewhere or heard about it. And so, yes, this would be really cool, and Tranny, maybe we'll get some good PR out of this, and, and we can present ourselves as avant-garde, cutting edge, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't realize what's involved. I mean, if you totally embrace the principles that I described, those are have some pretty radical connotations. You have to, number one, believe that human beings have free will. Right. So we have the power to choose, right, as human beings. And if you don't believe that, you're not going to end up in a good place. So if you accept the fact that human beings have free will, and it's best that people not use force or coercion, and the people should keep the commitments they make, then that leads to all kinds of important discoveries. One of them is it's nobody's job to motivate anybody. People are going to motivate themselves, or they're not, because they have free will. So you can create an ecosystem, an environment that allows people to freely engage with each other and do their best work. But they choose not to, then they've made their choice. And so you have to decide how you want to handle that at that point. But if you don't even believe people have free will, then you're probably into the command and control mode.
Yeah.
And doing it for the wrong reasons because you think it'd be cool or fun or interesting or give you some good PR or something like that, it's not going to lead to a successful outcome.
Right.
I have a question. Let's say someone's making that series of poor decisions and it's becoming noticeable. But give us a snapshot. How is that addressed? Typically in the old model, it's like, well, your boss comes down on you and you get written up. Describe what it looks like in the colleague approach.
Yeah. So there's no concept of progressive discipline because there's no such thing as discipline in self-management. So no one has any command authority, and no one has any authority to issue discipline in a self-managed environment. So what we have is we have a process called gaining agreement. And this process can be invoked by anyone at any time for any reason. And it can cover the extremely trivial, like what weight of copy machine paper should we use in the copy machine? Or it could cover something that's very jugular, like, you know what, your performance is lacking, and I think you need to find a different job at another company. So the gaining agreement process is a multi-stage process. So it really starts with a request from one individual to another, a request for change. So, for example, if I see someone driving a forklift in an unsafe manner, and I just don't think they have what it takes to be a forklift driver, I can ask them to culminate their services to the company. It's not working out. Now, a person has three possible responses. They can agree, they can disagree, or we can come to some negotiated third option neither of us had thought of before. So in that example, if the person agrees to leave, and that does happen, by the way, people are asked to leave and they just agree to leave. So that happens. then we're done. If we negotiate some third option, maybe the person says, you know what, I'll take the next week and I'll take a driving safety class to improve my skills, and I agree with that, then okay, then we're done for the moment. But if the person disagrees and just says, no, go pound sand, I want to keep driving my forklift the way I want to drive it, and I still believe in my request, then I'll escalate it to the next step, which is to bring in a third colleague to mediate a discussion. And I will renew my request. And at the end of that discussion, and that mediator's job, by the way, is just to mediate and offer their opinion as best they can. We have the same three options. So we either agree or disagree or negotiate some third option. If we still disagree, then I still believe in my request, we'll bring in a panel or a group of mediators whose job is to lend their voices and their expertise to the situation. And we'll try to work it out. And at the end of that discussion, we still have the same three options. So if we come to the end of that discussion and we still can't agree and I still believe in my request, then we agree by virtue of being colleagues here and subscribing to these principles that we will document our difference in writing and submit it to binding arbitration. And that is final. So once we submit it, the arbitrator will decide or designate someone else to decide. They'll decide, and that's the end of it, because it has to end somewhere.
Right.
So there is a way to resolve any conceivable situation. It does require people to articulate those requests and not to ignore the need to make those requests. So it takes some gumption, some initiative on the part of individuals to make that happen. So that's how it works.
Well, when I first read in your work about that process, and I've seen it in Reinventing Organizations, that book, blah blah blah. First thing I thought it was Matthew 18 passage where Jesus really just goes through that whole process. I'm like, bam, bam, bam. This is just laid out that process just perfectly. So now let's another scenario. Let's say I'm an office worker. We'll go back to the copier. So we've already agreed on the right copier paper, but I don't like this copier we've got. And I did a little Google research and found, man, there's this other great copier that so-and-so company makes, and we can get it for X amount of money. I think we need this thing. What do I do? Do I have to go ask somebody, or is there a committee, or is there some kind of form? How do I make a decision on buying this new copier?
Right. So the management of copiers and the decisions associated with managing copiers would be owned by someone in the organization. It may be that person. But Morningstar, we documented every process that needs to be executed for the company to deliver value to customers, from production to marketing and sales and distribution and administration and finance and all the rest. And then who's the individual that owns each one of those processes? And for in terms of owning a process, what is the scope of one's decision-making authority with respect to each process? Mm-hmm. So are you the decision maker and make all the decisions around managing copiers, or do you merely make recommendations to another decision maker, or do you make decisions based on others' recommendations, or what is the exact scope and quantum of decision-making authority that you possess for this process for which you've agreed to be fully accountable? So this is a dynamic in self-management whereby people are always able to negotiate for greater or lesser quantities of process ownership and decision rights, we call them. But at the end of the day, every process that we need to run this company needs to be owned by somebody, right? It always comes down to a human being. And then we want to be clear about decision-making authority. So it's all about accountability. It's about transparency. And it's about clarity. It's about being very, very clear about your role.
So someone could come in from another process. Let's say they're in marketing. They could come into administration and say, hey, I've got an idea that intersects your process, and I'd like to basically see if I could increase my, for lack of a better term, like decision rights. Like, would you be open to my input? And that would be something that maybe would work through a gaining agreement process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with most of those discussions just play out through the regular course of a conversation or a series of conversations. If they reach a point of disagreement and they feel strongly about the issue, they can invoke the gaining agreement process. Absolutely.
That's so good. I had another question that it'd be more about your story, your personal narrative.
Okay.
You know, you're at this point in the trailer where you and some other people said, here are the two principles. Like, what was it in your past that triggered that awakening that allowed you to even be able to see that moment in the trailer? You know, what was it about your story, your life, your experiences that caused you to be so sensitive and aware to this possibility? A lot of people just don't ever see it. It's like, I've always been over in this kind of vein, in these kind of cultures, and don't even really, I'm not dreaming about something else. I just want to conquer in this setting, you know?
Well, I don't think I was unique in the trailer. We were working out of a really tiny little farmhouse that was about a mile from the job site. And we had a core team of about 24 of us at the time. I think I was the only admin finance type. And then we had a number of technicians, mechanics, electricians, and so forth. And one day our founder, Chris Rufer, came into the farmhouse and he said, I'd like to call a colleague meeting and talk about governance, how to organize this company. So have some ideas. So we said, sure. So we met with him in the construction trailer, and I think it was a double wide, and we had steel folding chairs in a circle, and he passed out this document, and it was called the Morningstar Team Principles. And that's where he articulated the two core principles. And so he described them, and we looked at the document, and we asked a bunch of questions. And, you know, after a couple hours, you know, it's getting late, and we're kind of looking at each other going, well, you know, this makes perfect sense. I mean, this is how, you know, people should live their lives. We can't think of any reason not to adopt these principles, you know, so, okay, great. We'll do it. I don't think at that moment we quite realized the ramifications of everything that we were doing, but okay, that makes sense. So we did it. You know, every one of us there had grown up in traditional hierarchical organizations. I mean, if you think of your family in your early life, it was a hierarchy, of course, and your school experience was a hierarchy. And several Morningstar colleagues had served in the military. Of course, that's a hierarchy. And our prior jobs had all been hierarchies. So, you know, this is what we were used to, is what we had grown up and marinated in. And we said, well, okay, we'll try the self-management. Great, let's do it. It makes sense. You know, I'd had some really super command and control, you know, almost like dictatorial type situations and growing up in high school and so forth. And so, you know, I was more than ready to try something new and you know, stretch and see how it worked. So, you know, we just kind of collectively came to an agreement that, okay, we'll put a stake in the ground. We'll go self-manage, and we'll become the best tomato company in the world. And so that's kind of what we did.
So you didn't have, I mean, I assume there weren't a lot of models for you to go out to. I mean, the internet wasn't even cooking back then. Even if there had been, there probably wasn't a lot to, I mean, you guys really had to figure this out, scratch it out yourself, I'm assuming.
Well, and the inspiration, the impetus came from our founder, you know, Chris Rufer. I mean, he is a well-read guy, very thoughtful guy, big believer in freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Libertarian, believed passionately in these core principles, and his insight really was, okay, this is what I believe. Why am I not living it in the workplace? Why don't we bring it into the workplace
Right on.
and make it real? There's a great leader, CEO called Jean Ramin, runs the world's largest appliance manufacturer called the Haier Group. They're based in Qingdao, China, but they're a global company. They just bought GE Appliances in Louisville, Kentucky. They have 70,000 employees worldwide. And he just broke his company up into 4,000 or so self-managed teams. And he created this giant innovation platform where anyone can innovate, create new products or services. If they're successful, they can spin it off into a new company, which they would then run. It's amazing. And John Ramin is a very well-read guy as well, and he's made the observation, your Declaration of Independence in the United States, Thomas Jefferson, you talk about all men are created equal, and then you walk into the average American workplace, it's like a little dictatorship. What's that? What's that? What's up with that? So he's kind of got a point,
Wow, absolutely.
That's profound.
Yeah, it really is.
But this has been amazing, and your life's work with Morningstar is such a beautiful gift to the whole world.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for not giving up on it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're doing our part to pour it into the church. And, I'm kind of curious, but we're about to wrap up here, but I'm just curious. Have you had many church leaders contact you, faith-based leaders? Have you had much interaction?
Yeah, I've had a few. And done some work with churches, some leadership development, some coaching, and set up some processes so that peers in a church employment setting can kind of give each other feedback, create feedback loops on performance. So I've done some work with churches, and it's always interesting.
Wow. Yeah, it's always interesting. Well, hey, Doug, once again, it's an honor. We thank you for coming on. I want to ask for our listeners, where's the best place online in particular to connect with your resources and things that you've written or presenting or offering, training, whatever? Where should folks go to?
Yeah, so I would send them to our website, which is the New Focus Group, and it's New Focus Group. Well, let's see, newfocusgroupusa.com, and New Focus is NUFOCUS Group USA.com.
Good. Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks for your time, Doug. We really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Great to be with you. Thank you very much.